smart with ideas, but then when she laid them out, she was very unsystematic, called the early mechanism of separating the good experiences from the bad experiences in the child. She called that splitting. But Bion contends that the attack on the psychic apparatus is not a splitting in two, good and bad, or pleasant and unpleasant, but that it's a massive attack. It's like launching, let's say, a nuclear bomb onto a population. You just demolish the whole thing. You're not splitting the city into friends and foes. You are killing everybody.
There's a violence to it.
It's violent, exactly, right? Bion reserves the word splitting for that. He also speaks, uses a synonym that is fragmentation. I think fragmentation is very clear. When you say fragmentation, you know it's not in two, it's not good and bad. You know that you're talking of something that gets really to become rubble, demolished, right? You're speaking of a demolition.
Yeah, lineage splitting was more about to allow thinking, to allow the ability to tolerate enough to think, and this is to actually annihilate the ability to think.
Exactly. So Kleinian splitting, which Bion likes to call dissociation, and in Spanish actually, in the Spanish translation of Klein's word is dissociation.
Of Klein.
Yes, in Spanish. And D means two, doesn't it? It comes from the number two, D. One and the other, good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant. The good breast and the bad breast, the good mother, the bad mother, right? And that, as you say, allows thinking. If the child can separate the pleasant experiences, attributing them to a bad mother, then it can relate to the mother when mother is nice and comes back, and can go on living and benefiting from the good relation to mother. If the little baby would initially feel terribly in pain when the mother is not there, and had to realize that the mother that comes back is the same mother that left him crying for a while, it would be hard for this baby to lovingly get back to the mother, because it couldn't forget the feeling of pain that, from the point of view of the baby, the mother inflicted in him. So it's a life defense mechanism that helps the baby to create these two objects and can keep relating to the mother that it needs for surviving. Right? But this baby is not attacking its psychic apparatus. It's not going psychotic.
Is the fact that Klein talks about splitting and Bion talks about fragmenting,
Yes.
and views what Klein says as dissociating rather than splitting.
Yes.
Does that imply then that Bion had a more, I don't know what word to use, had a dimmer view of the human psyche than Klein did, or is it an indication of the fact that he used schizophrenic minds to inform his theory?
It's the latter, and the fact that he, unlike Klein, that he did have experience treating schizophrenics, which Klein didn't have. Klein had experience treating little children. Bion never treated little children, but he did treat psychotic patients, allowed him to, in some way, depart, or rather than depart, I would say, add to Klein's theory something that Klein had not developed, that is the concept of the psychotic personality. It's not that he disagreed with Klein about the paranoid schizo position that Klein was talking about, only that he said, well, this happens in the non-psychotic personality. That's what Klein said. In the psychotic personality, the splitting is not that neat. It's not between good and bad. Therefore, the repair is more unlikely to happen, because when you're trying to put the pieces together, you won't be able to.
Because of the splintering.
Because of the splintering. And this is what makes Bion also to say, in the psychotic personality, integration or reintegration of the split particles cannot happen. All that can happen is an agglomeration. You can agglomerate, but you cannot integrate. There is no repair. The attempt of repair becomes an agglomeration. That is, you smash the vase. Well, you can't put it together again. You can take the broom and collect the particles and put them in a bag, but you can't build the vase up again. It's broken.
So you can't
It's
reintegrate?
shattered.
I mean, so you can't reintegrate that sort of psychotic fragment?
According to Bion, you can't. When you have damaged, when you've smashed your psychic apparatus, it's smashed. In the psychotic part of the personality, but here's the catch of the trick, that is what you were saying. Bion also says, but wait a minute, as grim as this may look, there is also a non-psychotic part of the personality that may rescue you. But here's the problem. If the non-psychotic part of the personality has come to rescue you, what it will realize is the disaster that has happened, the calamity that has happened, and that then gives the personality an overwhelming feeling of guilt for the destruction that was launched on your own apparatus and your objects. So now you will have to bear the depressive feeling, the depression meaning the guilt, and saying, oh my God, what have I done? I didn't know that I've done this calamity. I thought I was fighting for justice. I didn't know that I was causing this destruction. Right? Now, I think, this is me, that much of what we read in the papers, the soldiers that commit suicide, sometimes in the front or when they come back, are having this overwhelming feeling of guilt when they realize the disaster that they have contributed to cause. They can't bear it. They feel overwhelmed, and they then commit some last disaster. They just kill themselves.
I would see it as shame. I mean, not that there's not guilt there too, but it seems like such a shame
Well,
experience.
It's another way to call the same thing, right? Because whether you call it guilt or shame, what is it? It's say, how could I have done that? I can't face that. I don't want anybody to see that. I cannot even myself face what I've done. That is an extreme feeling of shame, isn't it? It's not a little shame to say, oh, sometimes oh, someone saw my butt. That's not very nice. It's not, I mean, you won't kill yourself because of that. It's because you feel that you are yourself seeing what a disaster you have done to yourself and to others, and this gives you a feeling of, I can't bear it. Now, Bion calls that, and Landoni doesn't say that, but this is a Bionian concept. Bion calls that realization of madness, the realization of madness. That is that when the psychotic has a bit of an improvement, the improvement that is trying to put pieces together makes him realize how ill he is and what a disaster he has caused to himself. And that is a terrible pain to face, which most psychotics would then defend themselves by launching now a renewed attack on their minds that are informing them of the calamity that they have brought about to themselves.
There was a very nice kind of thought-provoking few lines in chapter 15. May I read it?
Mm-hmm. What page?
It's 130. It says, the analyst has to counteract the patient's need to avoid the emotional recognition of what he has been trying to evade all his life.
Yes.
But this involves taking risks, notably the risk of the patient's suicide. If the analyst allows himself to become shaken by the risk of suicide, he may misrecognize the relapse into the paranoid schizophrenia.
Exactly.
So what I understood that to mean is that if you if the therapy is effective and some of that those violent projections and fragmentations are reversely or projected back in the reverse.
Yes, we projective identification in reverse, or reversing of projective identifications, yes.
Then it risks what you're describing,
Exactly.
which is that calamitous sense of guilt and shame.
Yes, the realization of madness.
Is that then, as the person begins to experience some healing, is it that the person is moving so extremely into the depressive position?
Right.
And they feel the full weight of the reality that's happened.
Exactly. That's exactly so, yes.
Well, that is really Oedipal. I mean, that is Oedipus's dilemma.
Exactly, that's Oedipus' dilemma. He had to blind himself when he realized that he had killed his father. Sure. He had killed his father and he had committed incest with the mother. But he didn't know that. He didn't know that the man he killed was his father when he killed him, and he didn't know that the woman he married was his mother. If you are psychotic enough, you don't know. If you don't know, out of mind, out of sight, you're not responsible. But if you then are to realize what you did, then the unbearable feeling of, call it shame or persecutory guilt or depression, comes back onto you, right? And then how do you deal with that? Well, and one way of understanding Oedipus is blinding himself is going psychotic. If you don't take literally the blinding by himself, but doing something to his ability to understand, because the understanding was too painful to bear. You see, the blindness and the exile. Let's see. In chapter 14, we spoke already in chapter 15, we spoke of agglomeration versus integration. But in chapter 14, Blandoni reminds us of two things that are important here. That Bion, in speaking of projective identification, extended Klein's concept of projective identification into a communicative projective identification, that is, the identification that most of us used as we were little babies, and that in some parts of our minds form the matrix of our communication. That is, that we project something out. We're not only giving intellectual information. Well, sometimes we are, and then we become terribly boring, don't we? But typically, when we want to get something across to someone, we try to touch on someone's mind or to affect someone's mind, right? When you tell a joke, you want to make someone laugh. You're not just reporting a joke. You want to cause an effect on someone, right? Or if you are, let's say, a politician or a presidential candidate, you want to offend the other people, so to show that you are better than them because you want to win the election. But you want to, in actuality, cause an effect. You want to cause an effect in your audiences to make them believe that they should vote for you because you are so much better. If you just give an intellectual speech, it's not enough. Al Gore probably failed because he was too much of an academician. He was very good explaining things, but he couldn't touch people to change their minds in his favor, right? So that is communicative projective identification. That's different from